Good evening. Welcome to the Irish NFL show. Another week on from the madness that was free agency. Delighted to be joined this evening by Colin Croson and Frankie Abbott. Frankie, good evening. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. Just another day, in the life. Getting through. There's been some exciting trades taking place around the league, so just counting down the days until the NFL draft and ready to talk some ball with you guys. How's it going over there?
All good with me. Colin, how are you?
Good, yeah. I suppose after the first kind of week, we're almost spoiled, and then it goes into the second week of free agency, and there was a little, bit of a lull, but some interesting moves, and obviously we have a special guest this evening as well, and we've had our first batch of competition winners, Brian. So yeah, there's been lots going on this week.
Yes, we have. I should call out USA Sports. Have been very good to us over the past week with the prizes. And I suppose it doesn't end there, Colin. We're going to kick off another competition in the coming days, but also just to remind people that on the website you can get 25% off, or if you go in-store in the ILAC Centre in Dublin, there's still 20% off all items related to the NFL. We really appreciate their support to the show over the past week and the continued months ahead. As you touched on there, we are, a month away nearly from the draft. We saw CJ Stroud's pro day today, and everybody's raving about him. And again, that's a given now. He's the first round pick. Let's not even bother discussing it. His arm's off the charts, and his accuracy is fantastic. But then again, there's nobody on the field challenging him on these throws. So, look, we'll come to that. But I was going to kick off tonight with the Texans because a couple of days ago they made some really nice moves, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it. But over the course of today, we've seen two interesting moves, and they both relate to the same team, and that's the Jets. So around 5 o'clock, 5:30 our time, Frankie, and I'll come to you first. It broke that Mecole Hardman had been traded from the Chiefs. Oh, sorry, not been traded. He's a free agent. Apologies, he's a free agent, and he's been picked up by the Jets. A good move, in my opinion. To me, it looked like he was gradually being phased out of the Chiefs situation. I think you look at his strengths and his game, they're quite similar to Kadarius Toney. So he was also quite injury prone, and he did his utmost to get back for the Super Bowl. Didn't materialise. So a good pickup for the Jets. So I'm going to start with that one. But then obviously within 2 hours they've traded Elijah Moore to the Browns. I saw a really good one by Jim Rosenthal. I think from one of the NFL things, he said, if you want to get rid of a player, just contact the Browns. They'll take him off your hands no matter what the circumstances. They've swapped picks, second and third, and then already the guessing game is out there. That third pick inevitably is going to end up with Green Bay. But your thoughts on those two moves today?
Yeah, man, I like Mecole Hardman going to the Jets. It gives them kind of a different pace of receiver than they have in their room. I like Garrett Wilson a lot, but this kind of gives them a bit more of like a coverage setting receiver, someone who can really dictate what a defense can do with his speed. Again, gives them kind of something they didn't have. And like you said, it kind of forced their hand to move on from Elijah Moore, who's kind of a guy who hasn't had the best opportunity out there in New York. Same with a guy like Denzel Mims, who, it's just kind of a good opportunity to get a fresh start for everyone. I thought the Browns got a great deal in getting a guy like Elijah Moore, who's another, like, they've been looking for kind of that pure separator and man coverage that they can have out, like, opposite Amari Cooper and Donovan Peoples-Jones to kind of work out of that slot option. So I think a lot of great moves in the NFL, and you're kind of seeing, like, these receivers really aren't costing too much to get, especially when you compare them to what they were going for a year ago, 2 years ago. I mean, it seemed like last year was the birth of this huge wide receiver explosion, but it almost got to the point where it seems like if every receiver is worth so much and getting paid, then it's kind of the analogy that then none of them are technically worth it. And you're kind of seeing that this year with teams being so willing to ship off talented receivers, guys like Brandon Cooks being able to get gotten for like a 6th, 7th round pick, type of thing. So I think some pretty good moves all around. I'm excited to see what they end up doing in New York if Aaron Rodgers ends up finally going there.
Colin, I said Jim Rosenthal. He's formerly of ITV. I meant Greg Rosenthal. But I'm going to jump with you on Elijah Moore first, because last season he was very vocal in his disappointment and disgust of the quarterback play from Zach Wilson, and then he brightened up, and he brightened up in some of the games as well when he had Mike White there. He hasn't said much recently. I'd imagine he was hoping that he wouldn't be moved on because inevitably Aaron Rodgers is going to come into the Jets and he would have had an opportunity to play with him. But like Alan Lazard is in, obviously he's come from the Packers. They've obviously now done the Hardman deal. Tonight, Connor Hughes, who works for New York Sports TV, is already out, and he's continuously coming out with tweets to say they're going to make a real strong move now to bring in Odell Beckham as well, because this is another player on the wish list for Aaron Rodgers. So it essentially feels a bit like they're trying to bring in what they can to please the quarterback, the incoming quarterback. But were you surprised by these moves this evening?
Not really. I mean, I would agree. I suppose in terms of what Frankie is saying around like the cost seems to have gone down a bit, though. We haven't seen any superstars go yet, and perhaps let's say the. I mean, Frankie and I were obviously keeping an eye probably on the Jerry Jeudy situation. There was a lot of talk, but with the moves the Browns have made, I don't think he'll be going anywhere. But nobody seemed to be willing to give away a first. I think it probably makes a lot of sense for everyone. I mean, the Browns, given what they have done at QB, are in win now, and so they needed to bring people in, but they have to be somewhat cognizant of the cap. They've already had to move money around there, and we know the situation in New York, and they just, I suppose, acquiring capital to see when it'll happen. There have been various kind of talks. I mean, I think during the week I saw initially this could drag to Easter, then all of a sudden this could drag until the 2nd of June. I mean, even in the New York market, which we know is the biggest media market on the planet, how anyone can have anything left for this story about Aaron Rodgers, it just feels like, just a never-ending saga. And the Jets will certainly improve at QB. I mean, it was funny when you were talking at the beginning about the pro day. I mean, it's the pro day ultimately that got Zach Wilson the second overall. Like, he threw in inside under no pressure, and ultimately the Jets kind of lost their mind over it, and that has put them in the situation that they now find themselves, where they have a pretty solid team outside of the QB, and they need to rectify that. I hope, my hope is that this is it. This is the second round pick. This gets it done, and we can all just move on to another story. I am really, really ready for that.
You said they lost their minds at that pro day. Well, they've definitely lost their minds since, in terms of looking at the play that they received from Zach Wilson. I just want to make a couple of final points on them before we move on. So there's a few scenarios going around this deal. Like, the Packers are comfortable in the sense of hanging on from June because there seems to be some kind of cap situation which will be to their benefit. Obviously, some money comes off the number potentially for next year if they hang on to June the 2nd. And there's also a kind of a theory that they don't really want a number of picks this year because the team is going to be in essentially a bit of a rebuild next year. And if they were to get draft picks and high draft picks for next year, they know exactly what they need to address come the end of next season, and that would be more beneficial to them to get the cap situation resolved and they get picks for the future. So it seems like they're more comfortable to see this out and let it slide because they have their quarterback. They know who their quarterback is next season, and that's Jordan Love. The Jets know who their quarterback is, but they do need to get him in because no matter what happens, these voluntary training camps come the end of April, these initial periods that Rodgers would never be at. I'd imagine that with a new team, the expectation is he would be attending all of this. Otherwise, you're into a bit of another storyline in itself. But look, yeah, I have a funny feeling this is going to drag on, Colin. I just don't see how it's going to end. Maybe this second round pick, as you said, that's been returned in this deal from the Jets, from the Browns will help the situation, but I don't see it. I think this could drag in towards the draft period and thereafter. So I'll jump to, unless you have anything else to say on this, but I think at this stage we've exhausted everything you could say on Aaron Rodgers. Every nut and cranny is gone at this stage. Look, the Texans, we're talking about the CJ the Stroud pro day, and inevitably if he isn't selected at number 1, I'd imagine they will pick him right now. General consensus is it'll be Stroud and Bryce Young at number 2. But the Texans have floated under the radar, and yet this week they've made 2, what I would say, reasonable deals. I like the Jordan Schultz one. I think Jordan Schultz's agent has misconstrued the market because by all accounts he turned down a deal last week, which was much more superior to the deal he got in the end. And I think he was expecting bigger offers to come in, and it didn't materialise, and he's gone to the Texans. And the other one, Singletary, for me is a bit of a strange one because we haven't seen the production from him. the Bills. And the Bills are a strong side. Their offensive line has been patchy at times, but they've never had a consistent run game, and he hasn't really done great things. And he's going to go in there, and okay, Tunsil's have to get the big deal, but it'd be interesting to see what they get from him. But I'll start with you, Frankie. Like, your thoughts on these two deals, like smart moves because of the team in which they have at the moment.
Yeah, I'm actually a pretty big fan of what the Texans have been doing the last couple of years. Last year, they brought in a couple of guys that I really liked as well. But I think the Dalton Schultz move is actually a pretty underrated signing for them. I really like the idea of getting your young quarterback, as we all assume that they're going to do, a kind of a safety blanket, kind of target in that tight end room, a little bit of an easier over the middle check down guy. And we've seen Dalton Schultz be really productive in that area. I'd say like he's probably a top 12 guy when you look at the tight ends around the league. Like he's pretty easily that. While Devin Singletary hasn't been super productive, I think having him as a complementary piece to Dameon Pierce is actually like fits the two of their play styles pretty well. And I mean, yeah, I think the Texans kind of continue to make like, these aren't necessarily big splash signings. I think Dalton could maybe be considered that, but like, we're not necessarily seeing too much like, huge splash. I'd say overpays. I really like the move to keep Tunsil. Someone might call that an overpay, but Tunsil's one of the best offensive tackles in the league, especially when, again, you're talking about bringing a young quarterback that you want to be able to have some trust in his offensive line, have arguably the best left tackle in the NFL kind of blocking for him. So I think it's a pretty strong start for them. And, I think Texans fans should actually be pretty excited going forward with what D'Amico's putting together out down there.
Colin, I don't know if you're aware of this one, because in the week that we've had with all these deals, like Case Keenum is now Texans quarterback, and I would have thought he's coming in to back up the inevitable selection in this year's draft, whether it's Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, or if they go a different route with Richardson, Will Levis. But where does that leave Davis Mills in all this? Because he came in as a bit of a stopgap, then all of a sudden they thought there was a bit of potential there, and he kind of slided a little bit last year. Like, are they going to have three quarterbacks on the roster? It doesn't really make sense to me.
Well, given the money that they're paying Davis Mills, they can kind of do whatever they want there. He was a pleasant surprise, but ultimately last year it showed that he wasn't going to be the franchise guy. You're going to keep him around as a camp body because he's cheap and he's capable. I mean, look, some of the guys throwing camp wouldn't be able to really take to the field at NFL level at all. He's shown he can at least go out there, even if he's not going to say win you games. But Keenum, or Case Keesum, as John Elway famously introduced him, is a good guy to have around. I mean, you saw all the videos last year about like kind of his relationship with Josh Allen and kind of he was a great guy to have around the Bills camp. So that makes a lot of sense to bring somebody like him in who, if you did want to start him, and look, my feelings, I think you start rookie QBs as early as you can. But if you did want to start him early, you're not going to have an issue in terms of benching him and bringing somebody in. So the Texans are making a lot of sense. And we talked about it during the week a little bit, Brian. The Brandon Cooks one, he seemed to be the only person in the world upset about Jack Easterby being fired or moving on. And he has now moved on. So maybe harmony is beginning to descend upon Houston after a really, really turbulent couple of years where they treated head coaches really, really badly. But for their long-suffering fans, I hope this is the dawn of a new era.
Frankie, Davis Mills, tradable scenario?
That's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, if it gets to draft night and you're able to move him for like a day 3 pick, I think that's completely reasonable. I think he's a guy that teams might be interested in having as a backup option. I mean, he's shown, I think, a decent enough amount in the league. And as Colin was pointing out, Case Keenum is about as good of a backup quarterback as you can hope for, especially if you're going to have a young guy there. Like, I think, he's not perfect, but he's got enough experience. I think he can kind of spot start a game if you need him to. He can finish out games if you need him to. I think he'll be a good mind to have in the room for your young QB you bring in. So, yeah, I think it's another good acquisition. I mean, with Keenum's experience playing in a lot of the schemes that I think they'll be incorporating in Houston with getting in Bobby Slovic, like, I think it's a good addition. So, yeah, I completely agree. And then, yeah, so for Mills, I think that's kind of the best case scenario. Mills is a guy that I think is going to continue to need reps in his development. I don't think he's necessarily a finished product yet. And that's not me saying I think he's going to get like a ton better, but just kind of, you'd like to see him still be able to get a little bit of time. And if you're bringing in a guy, a Bryce Young, a CJ Stroud, whoever, you're giving them the majority of the reps, and then Keenum might get a little bit of the rest. But yeah, I think if you can move him for like a 6th, 7th rounder, 5th rounder, I think a team will probably be willing to pay that price come draft night when they realize like, hey, we've got a roster spot we could use our backup quarterback position. Like if you're a playoff team and you could use like an upgrade at the backup QB spot, I would totally be willing to give up a 5th or a 6th for Davis Mills, you know?
Frank, I'll stick with you for a second. They're picking 12th in the drafts as well, so this is not for the first time. Like I think last year it was similar. I think, they were in the mid-teens. I think it was 15 last year, but they're 12 again this year. And we spoke a couple of weeks back about the Ohio State wide receiver. I'll let you try to pronounce his name. Smith Nijija or
Jackson Smith and Jigba.
Yeah, there we go. I'll get it on draft night, Colin. Don't worry. But his stock levels have risen significantly since the combine. Like there was this conversation around him or two other guys potentially being the number one pick. He's the general consensus now. And then with the guys, Cooks is gone, and obviously Dorsett is gone, who's kind of a journeyman at this stage. He's gone to the Raiders. Like he's the obvious candidate, I would have thought, to go to the Texans at 12.
Yeah, no, I think he makes a ton of sense, especially if they take a guy like CJ Stroud. You're able to get him a college weapon that he ended up being able to use for a couple of years. But yeah, man, the Ohio State Pro Day, he looked pretty good today. Ran in like the low 4.5s, which was kind of the big concern that I'd say the public had, but probably not as much like NFL fan bases. Incredibly twitchy guy, good separator. I think he'll be a plus receiver at the next level. All the Ohio State guys from last year, such as Olave and Garrett Wilson, have raved that he was the best of their receiver core. So I think he will be that kind of receiver one that ends up going. Maybe Jordan Addison kind of battles him out for that number one spot. But I think, yeah, Jackson Smith and Jigba makes a ton of sense. And when you're talking about the spot at 12, totally, man, send it for me. If you're, again, it's all about trying to build a nest for whatever young quarterback they get in, give him as good of a situation as possible. What better way to do that than to possibly get a guy, his college teammate, or the receiver you view as the best or second best in the draft,
Colin, we touched on Singletary obviously coming in, free agent from the Bills and not being productive. And I think the Bills, I'm just going to jump to the Bills for a second, because they made a real smart move, in my opinion, in signing Damian Harris this week. I mean, we've been talking about who they're going to get in at running back, and there's been talk of them, looking to do potential trades for Saquon Barkley and other players within the league. Like over the course of the last couple of years, he's been really good for the Patriots, and a bit of an odd man out in the end because of other various different reasons within the Patriots. But for me, he's a really strong signing for someone who's not going to be on a massive amount of money and not a massive hit to your cap, to bring in with experience, and experience within the division as well.
Yeah, I suppose that the Bills look, I mean, it's certainly the last 2 years now we've talked about the running game struggling to get going, and they've kind of had to lean into Josh Allen at times. They've tried a number of different things, and obviously the trade for Hines towards just on the trade deadline earlier this year. Maybe kind of this can give them a bit of a 1-2 punch, and they can look to get, because that has been an issue, right? You haven't had to worry about the Bills rushing game at all, and when you don't have anything to, it's that 1-2 punch. Like we talk about, like the Chiefs, right? And that no matter who the Chiefs have a running back, they do really well, and that's because it's Patrick Mahomes, right? Because you're never going to go against the run for the Chiefs, because you're going up against Patrick Mahomes. So it doesn't matter who you have in there. But for the Bills, the line issues mean that has been one of the areas that they've struggled in. They're looking to do something, but can the line hold up enough to ensure that Josh Allen has the time to do what he needs to do? He has flashed. Obviously, look, the Patriots game is the highlight, right? Probably in the last 2 years, they were perfect in that game. I'm fascinated to see what other moves they kind of make over the course of the offseason.
I think we'll come back to the Bills, because I also want to move on to the Titans. But our guest is here, Arif Hasan from Pro Football Network. Delighted to join us this evening. Arif, you're no stranger to the Irish NFL show. You've been on a couple of times with us. You did a live show with us in London pre-Vikings and Saints. Obviously, we ran into you as well in Arizona in Radio Row. It's fantastic to have you back on the show.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic to be back.
Arif, we're just talking about free agency there, and again, it's a bit weird because it doesn't seem that long ago that the three of us were in Arizona enjoying the weather and enjoying a great week, and People have touched on their first ever Super Bowl, but the game itself was a fantastic game to end a great season.
Oh, no, absolutely. A really phenomenal back and forth, a great comeback to have it. One of the greatest quarterback performances probably in any game that I've seen, and that quarterback happened to lose. Like I think that having a really remarkable game like that to kind of cap off the season is pretty rare. So I very much enjoyed and appreciated that.
I'm interested, Arif, because I suppose we're talking there in terms of the Chiefs and just everything that since Patrick Mahomes arrived on the scene, they have been the King Midas in many ways. Everything that they touch kind of turns to gold. But you wrote a piece around obviously their kind of big free agency acquisition of Juwan Taylor, and maybe wondering a little bit in terms of the contract. I'm interested in hearing a little bit more in terms of that, because that is a piece, obviously, where they were decimated in the Super Bowl a few years ago, and Patrick Mahomes was left to run for his life. They've made moves on that to solidify it. Last year, Orlando Brown came in, happy days, but obviously he has moved on. But can you talk to me a little bit more around your concerns around the contract and I suppose Taylor's play?
Yeah, I mean, Juwan Taylor, obviously, the Jaguars invested a lot into him when they drafted him, but they made him a right tackle. He's been a right tackle for the last 4 years, and he wasn't, particularly spectacular at that position until his final year, with the Jaguars, and that was primarily kind of, an improvement as a pass protector, and I am concerned about kind of two things regarding how the Chiefs are approaching this. How they wanted to make Juwan Taylor their left tackle of the future. And the first, of course, is that he hasn't played left tackle in the NFL, and that it takes a lot to kind of change your muscle memory to move from right tackle to left tackle. It's a bit of a projection. It sometimes can be, pretty difficult. You know what? We've seen tackles do it pretty successfully in the NFL. The Cowboys, moved around Doug Free and Tyron Smith for quite a while on the left and right sides. They're doing the same thing, right now with the tackle that they drafted in last year's draft from Chattanooga. And I think that, there is something to be said, in kind of just projecting a general skill set to do pretty well. But it's one thing to do that with like a rookie contract, to do that with somebody that you're a little bit more comfortable, benching if it doesn't work out, initially. It's another thing entirely to do that with a contract that pays about an average of $20 million a year. And I know that contract averages are not, the best way to go about evaluating how a contract is looked at. But if you take a look at the structure of the Taylor contract, the Chiefs can't get out from under it for the first 2 years of the contract. That's typical for contracts this big. And in the third year, they won't be able to get out of it without taking about $9 million in dead cap space. So there's not a lot of flexibility in this contract either. So they're paying this person a lot of money to play at a level that they have not yet played at, right? Because even last year, he played well, but I don't think he played well enough to be called a $20 million tackle. So they're projecting an improvement over the level of performance that he had actually had in the NFL. They're projecting that improvement at a position that he hasn't played in the NFL. And they're doing it with a contract that doesn't offer them, a lot of flexibility. I don't know if they were able to offer the same contract that Orlando Brown was able to get with the Bengals. Maybe, he took a little bit less out of spite. Maybe, the guarantee structure wasn't something that they wanted. But you just take a look at the fact that the Bengals are paying him, $16 million a year for 3 years. I think it's a 4-year contract, but the fourth year seems like a fake year to me, like a lot of these contracts. $16 million a year for essentially 3 years. Now they're paying Juwan Taylor, who has not played as well as Orlando Brown, who has not played the same position that Orlando Brown is playing. That one's tough to me. And, Orlando Brown's a good example of a player that moved from the right to the left that, played pretty well for them. So maybe that's kind of one of the reasons that they're a little bit more comfortable with this. But every new attempt at moving a player around is a little bit of a risk. And I'm not as comfortable with it, especially when Orlando Brown was not that far removed from playing left tackle in college. Juwan Taylor is now about 5 years removed from playing left tackle in college. So there's a lot here I don't like.
What's going on, Arif? So I'm a pretty big Broncos fan, Colin's a Broncos fan. So I was just kind of curious. I've been kind of looking over the massive spending spree they've obviously had in this first week of free agency. And it's a little bit like, I don't know, I feel like the general kind of consensus is that while they may have spent a lot of money, I don't think this team necessarily took many huge steps forward. Like, the offensive line I think will be improved, but it definitely doesn't feel like, when you look at the positions they've maybe invested so much in, like, I don't know. When you look at kind of these moves overall, do you see this as a team that's kind of trying to buy into the Russell Wilson window as it stands, or do you think they're kind of trying to reset their foundation, if you will, and kind of restart their building of the house from scratch a little bit?
Yeah, I think they're a little bit prepared to do both right now. I think that one of the reasons that they signed, I think it was Jarrett Stidham, right? One of the reasons that they signed Jarrett Stidham, I think, is that you've got somebody that Sean Payton liked coming out of college, that the NFL seems to actually like quite a bit for his capability in the quarterback room, because I think that he averaged 8 yards an attempt over the final 3 games of the season, even threw a couple of interceptable passes in that final one. That they would be, if need be, they would be a little bit comfortable moving to Jarrett Stidham at points during the season if it's just not working with Russell Wilson. That said, a lot of the contracts that they've signed are pretty long-term contracts. It's funny you mentioned the Juwan Taylor thing, because that's in an article about, the worst contracts the Denver Broncos gave one of those, I think, to Zach Allen. So, it's interesting the way that they're building this team, because certainly they want to build in the mold of a Sean Payton type team. It's pretty clear, that the investments that they make along the offensive line, especially along the interior, are pretty typical of a Sean Payton team. You remember, when they signed Jerry Evans and Carl Nicks and Ben Grubbs, it's very much focused on building out that interior offensive line. And they're moving receiver, or potentially moving receivers that they feel like they don't need to move. It feels like they want to kind of embody all the things that Peyton really likes about about team building and about his Saints teams, which it's going to be kind of difficult, because this is going to be an additional transition for Russell Wilson, and maybe the transition isn't for him. At the same time, it's a difficult contract to get out of, and I think that they're committed to trying to get the most out of it while they can, even if that means, moving, Jerry Judy or whichever receiver that they end up moving. So there is a bit of a sense that they're kind of preparing for Sean Payton to take control or ownership of the team in a way that's kind of independent of the vision that was previously imagined for the Broncos. But I think that they're still trying to kind of make this work, because, the way that they're signing players, obviously these are long-term contracts. The way that they're signing players seems to indicate that they think that there's at least some kind of window right now that they want to exploit. But certainly I don't think that they're putting all their eggs in one basket.
Arif, Gardner Johnson was very vocal when he signed for the Lions this week, in terms of suggesting this team is as good as the team in which he just left in the Eagles. And they've done some, fairness, they have done some nice acquisitions in the secondary to kind of improve the team. I just think they're not getting a lot of talk in terms of the draft. Like, they're picking 6th and 18th in the first round, and in particular the quarterback scenario, with 4 quarterbacks expected to go in the top 10, and nobody's really putting the Lions into that kind of quarterback scenario, because they all feel they're comfortable with Goff. But like, with the pick at 18, do you see any scenario where if one of those quarterbacks was still there at 6, they could consider going that road?
Yeah, I think that 18th pick gives them a little bit of a luxury, a little bit of flexibility with what they do with that 6th pick, especially because the projection for the Lions typically is a cornerback. Now, they signed a couple, right? They signed a couple of players in the secondary, so they don't have to, force a pick there. Having, Emmanuel Mosley and Cameron Sutton, gives them the ability, and, CJ Gardner-Johnson's played a fair amount of nickel too, gives them the flexibility to kind of do what they want. Plus, the sweet spot seems to actually be closer to 18 for the cornerback, a spot in the draft. Like, yeah, you might be able to choose between Christian Gonzalez and Joey Porter at 6, and that'd be pretty fantastic. But, there's a lot of great first-round cornerbacks in this draft. And you might be doing yourself a little bit of a service of picking a premium player at 6, and then picking, that cornerback, whether that's going to be like Keely Ringo or somebody at 18. And seeing, hey, if somebody falls to 6, maybe we could grab a developmental guy, maybe like, Will Levis or an Anthony Richardson, and sit them behind Goff, because, yeah, the Lions certainly seem kind of like they're committed to Goff, but I don't know how strongly anyone really believes that, right? So I could certainly see them grabbing a quarterback and waiting to develop him, having that luxury of that first round pick to not really sacrifice opportunities to continue building the team in ways that they need to build it. And certainly, the free agency approach has allowed them to be really flexible with the way that they, kind of pick and choose, right? I mean, maybe they pick a receiver because they really like, having, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams together. Maybe they want kind of a slot guy, which there's going to be a lot of those guys. So the fact that they have been aggressive enough in free agency to address a lot of the needs in a way that doesn't require them, to force a position, I think allows them to be kind of aggressive about quarterback. Plus, additionally, still having that first round pick is going to make it a little bit easier. So I wouldn't take them off the board entirely, but it's just kind of one of those things where you don't see a quarterback mock to them because it just seems more likely that it's another pick, right? And so either, those 4 quarterbacks go early and it's not going to be available for the Lions, or you just see like, hey, Christian Gonzalez seems like a perfect fit. I mean, he's physical, he's young, he's got, a lot of tools available to him. He seems like a Dan Campbell guy. And so just, you feel like you want to move in that direction, right? Like if a bunch of people think something is like 60% most likely to happen, more than 60% of those people are going to pick that pick there, right? So you kind of have a skewed understanding of what the probabilities are, just because you see all these people pick a cornerback or something like that, and certainly I think anything could happen there.
Arif, when you were on with me, I think back in January, and we talked about the fact that Vikings fans were pretty fed up with Ed Donatell at that point, and just kind of there was a demand for change that happened. And yet I saw you retweet something the other, maybe it was yesterday or certainly within the past couple of days, around the fact that the Vikings fans have been the most negative across social media. And on Twitter, I think they're almost twice as negative as anyone else.
Yeah.
What has it just been a really long winter in Minneapolis? What's going on?
I'm confident some of that has to do with me. But yeah, no, I'm not really sure, because we don't really have an understanding of what the time. I mean, I didn't click through, so maybe there was some methodology discussion there, but I just thought it was kind of funny, so I kind of retweeted it. But we don't know how long a time span this was taken over. Was it just the off season? Was it over the course of the season? Or at least if they said so, I didn't read that closely. But yeah, I mean, it could be that it includes, some elements of time where, Ed Donatell was still the defensive coordinator, right?
The claim seems to be that it's since free agency began, and I'm just
that is very silly to me. I don't know.
Were people expecting enormous moves from the? It didn't seem, certainly from the outside, that the Vikes were ever going to make massive moves. Like, they didn't have the money to make massive moves.
We don't know the nature of the negative comments, right? It could just be expressing negativity about the fact that they don't have a lot of room to make massive moves, right?
Very, 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 very true. Very true.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, it could be, right, that the Vikings fans very much enjoy the direction the team is going in, but don't really see it producing anything, right? And you could still just be like, yeah, well, I'm glad that they grabbed that guy. I don't know how that's going to help, but this sort of thing, right? So I don't know. Plus, I mean, moving on from some really like storied franchise players, people like Adam Thielen, Eric Kendricks. I mean, that's going to invite some negative comments whether or not it's the right move. I think a lot of fans think that it was, correct to move on from Adam Thielen, and Adam Thielen wanted to move on, right? So there's not really much you can say about that. And a lot of fans kind of probably understand, moving on from Eric Kendricks, but that doesn't mean you're not going to have some level of sadness or negativity about that. Plus, the news that Za'Darius Smith, asked to be released, I'm sure that created, some sort of totally negative tweets and stuff like that. What I found really interesting is that the Vikings were, like you mentioned, particularly negative on Twitter. They're, like you said, twice as negative on Twitter. They were not the most negative fan base on Facebook. They were, up there, but I don't think they were top 5. They were not the most negative fan base on Reddit. Their ranking at number 1 was entirely driven by Twitter. So yeah, I want to know what kind of the difference in the platforms means there.
It's that Midwestern seasonal depression, man. It's just beating them into submission. They're just complaining about it. And then some more snow comes. They get a day of sun. They think it's over, and then boom, more snow. I'm in Wisconsin,
yeah, full
so
spring.
I feel
Full
all that,
spring
right?
hurts us all.
It's every time. It's
Yeah.
like 9 steps until you finally get some sun.
Yeah,
I feel that. So I just wanted to ask. So we were touching on the Eagles a little bit earlier. So like, I feel like it's almost like you can kind of expect some backslide from them a little bit this year. There's obviously been some brain drain in the coaching staff. They've lost some key players. What do you think is like reasonable expectations for Eagles fans this year? Do you think they should kind of look at it as this is still a contending team? I think that they still can be with a lot of the talent they have, but where do you think is like a reasonable goal for them to set for themselves with how much they kind of lost this offseason.
That's really tough, right? Like you said, there's brain drain in the coaching staff, not just at the coordinator level, but below it a little bit as well. And they had like 8 or 9 free agents just on defense, and they, signed some of them back. Darius Slay, obviously, was able to rework his deal and stay, which, that was kind of an 11th hour move. But, they lose Javon Hargrave, I think, to the 49ers. They lose Isaac Sayamolu. Like they lose, and that's an offensive player, but they lose a lot of players. And CJ Gardner-Johnson, he complained about the deal that he got from the Eagles, right? So it seems like there's just not enough juice there, right, for them to be able to really make some moves. And then they probably overpaid Fletcher Cox to stay, right, because he was fine last year, but he used to be playing at kind of like a Chris Jones level, and they're kind of paying him like he still can do that. And I don't know. So I would imagine that a player like Fletcher Cox, I don't know if they figured out if they're bringing Brandon Graham yet back or anything like that. But if they do, somebody like Brandon Graham, I don't know that they'll be able to play at that level again, given kind of the ages that they are. So you should expect some level of drop off. They lost both of their linebackers, I want to say, Kazir White and TJ Edwards. And Nakobe Dean is there, which is nice that you've got kind of a plan in place. But, I think they also still lost Marcus Epps. I think he's somewhere else too. So they lost both their safeties. They lost, both their linebackers. They lost a good chunk of their defensive line. I don't know how they could be just as good. But the thing is, like, once you make it to the Super Bowl, like that's the standard now.
Right.
So that's what they're going to be judged against. And I think that that's probably fair. So I would project them to lose a substantial number of wins off of last season. But if I'm an Eagles fan, I would probably just trust that Jalen Hurts, he had the best game of his life, in the Super Bowl. I would just kind of trust that development to continue. Maybe it would be a blind trust. Maybe it's misplaced optimism. But that, I think, is kind of the standard that as a fan that you set for yourself, knowing that there is kind of a lot of room for the bottom to fall out there, right? Because if you're relying more on like Milton Williams to take a bunch of snaps, you're not in a great spot.
No, it'll be interesting too, seeing how long like the love affair with Sirianni can last. Like, I mean, he came in, kind of got a lot of flack. Last year was the man of Philadelphia. People are taking screenshots of him meme mugging the other sidelines and stuff, but like you're saying, you lose out on a lot of stuff. Fans are going to be expecting Super Bowl or bust. I mean, this is a team that's relying on so many young guys. They're obviously going to make draft picks this year with all their selections. It's kind of like, it's a lot to ask a young guys to kind of follow up this Super Bowl contending roster that was top to bottom so stacked, even in the coaching staff, to, be able to perform at that level. So,
yeah. And no one wrote Howie Roseman's luck. Jalen Carter will rock up at 10 to pick him, and then he'll be the number 1 pick he should have been, and he'll be fantastic for them. And all the other teams in the NFC East fans will be crying again. Arif, when Tom Brady left the Patriots didn't really have any backup plan, and they rolled the dice on Cam Newton that year. And the night prior to tampering period started, me and Colin recorded a podcast, and it was speculated at that stage they were going to go after Baker Mayfield, and we were saying, the Bucs have no backup plan here. They couldn't go after Baker Mayfield. Well, lo and behold, they signed Baker Mayfield, and it looks like he's going to be the starter. Were you taken back by that deal? Did you like, it was kind of, you could see it coming, but when I heard it, I went, really?
I like the deal. I like $4 million. That's pretty good. Like, I don't expect Baker Mayfield to be good. I expect him to be better than $4 million at quarterback. And so I like it. I think that if you've got, so Mayfield has put together about 3-ish kind of good performances, right? And by that, I mean like chunks of time across like 5 different seasons, right? So he looked kind of good with the Rams. Maybe that's overselling it a little bit, but there were moments that looked, pretty good. The 2020 with the Browns was really fantastic. And then, his rookie year after they fired all the coaches, he looked pretty great, right? And so trying to figure out kind of what Baker Mayfield you're going to get, you're probably not going to get a good player. That's fine. You're not consuming that much cap space, but you've got kind of an open competition between this young guy that you don't really have a ton of confidence in Kyle Trask. You've got, Baker Mayfield. And if your coaching staff is good enough, which I'm not, buying the Bucks coaching staff or anything like that, but the ownership is, otherwise they would have fired them, right? And so if you buy that coaching staff being good enough to do something, then you want to believe that your coaching staff can kind of extract the best from players. And the best of Baker Mayfield is actually pretty good, especially compared to the rest of the NFC South. And so I don't expect him to succeed, but that is like a gamble I'm willing to take at $4 million, which I believe has like escalators and stuff like that. If he's hitting his escalators, then you're pretty happy. So I was, I guess, a little surprised that's kind of the direction they went with. I think that the perceived movement of quarterbacks up the draft board following the combine made it really difficult to anticipate that the Buccaneers would be able to grab a quarterback in the draft unless it was like a Hendon Hooker or Tanner McKee type or something like that. In which case, yeah, you should probably get a quarterback in there as well. But I like the deal. I was just kind of surprised that that's kind of the direction that they went in, but I don't think it. I don't think it locks them in. Like, I think when the Patriots went after Cam Newton, there was a strong expectation from idiots like me that they'd be able to really get something going, and they didn't, right? And they did have kind of a progression, right? They could move on from him to Mac Jones, but I think that there was a higher expectation on Cam Newton than there is on Baker Mayfield. To me, that's just you're buying a lottery ticket.
Do you see it as an open competition? I know it's very early. I know it's only March, but do you see a scenario where it's Kyle Trask and the Baltimore battling for the position come training camp, or is it really Baker Mayfield's position and they'll say all the right things, but essentially he'll still be the starting quarterback?
At $4 million, you're not promised anything. I think it's an open competition. They did like publicly commit to Trask in a very big way before the signing, which, like the Arizona Cardinals famously committed to Josh Rosen and then drafted Kyler Murray, right? Like, there's only so much that you can take from that. But it wasn't like, the Rams and Jared Goff, right? They were just like, yeah, he's currently under contract. Yeah, that's accurate. Like they were at least a little bit more forward in supporting the quarterback that they had. So I do think it's going to be an open competition, and I don't think it'll be the case that if Mayfield looks bad in camp, they'll just be like, guess this is what we're stuck with. I think they want, to see Kyle Trask kind of, because, there was no opportunity for him to compete against Tom Brady, right? I think that they want to see him to succeed in a true competition environment.
Arif, we always enjoy when we have you on the show, and you have been very generous with your time. If people watching this or people listening to it on the podcast want to check out more of your stuff, where can they do that?
Sure. Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter. I recommend against it. That's at Arif Hasan NFL, ARIFHASAN NFL, or you can just check out my articles over at profootballnetwork.com. I've got an author page there, so it's like /author/A Hasan. But that's where all my work is, written down. I've also got a podcast, the Norse Code podcast, as well as the Minnesota Football Party, where I appear on twice a week. So if you like hearing podcasts, which hopefully you do, otherwise, what are you doing here? You can subscribe to those. Otherwise, you can read my written work over at Pro Football Network.
I would recommend following Arif on Twitter, if only for the Benjamin Solak slander, which is always entertaining. But we appreciate you, and hopefully we will catch up with you again on some side of the Atlantic in the not too distant future, Arif.
That sounds fantastic. I would love to.
Take it easy.
Thanks, Arif. Thank you.
Right on, man.
Arif is on Pro Football Network. Always great. Brilliant stuff. You're right, Colin. What he puts out on Twitter is really enjoyable, fantastic stuff.
I saw that poll too about the most toxic fan bases. I was pleasantly surprised with the Broncos ranking. I thought it'd be a lot higher up, honestly, but not too much negativity. But yeah, that Vikings rating was crazy. Like a third of their fans, all negativity. Love it.
Frankie, I have been on a fantastic crash course over the past 3 years when it comes to Broncos stuff. Nothing surprises me anymore. No matter what I read from the Denver world. I was going to jump on the Titans before Arif came in, because Sean Bunting Murphy, Colin, your old friend from Super Bowl 54, was it? 55? You got an opportunity to speak to him remotely because it was back in the COVID days. But that was an interesting move, and we're touching on the Bucs there. Like, he's gone to the Titans this week, and Titans have been, we're talking about teams not doing a lot of business. Like, they let Dupree go last week to release him pre free agency, and I'll come to you for a comment. where do you see his team right now? Because I know a couple of Titans fans, and they're genuinely saying to me, I've no idea what the expectation is for this team anymore. Things just seem to have gone awry very quickly from where they were 12 months, 13 months ago, where they were the 4th seed going into the playoffs, losing that difficult game to the Bengals, having a really bad season. And they don't seem to have done a lot. You know, they brought in a couple of players on defense, and Bunting probably is the marquee pickup, but like he's had a lot of injuries as well. So it's a strange one, because I had a Titans fan saying, I'd love to know what your views are on the show. And I said, well, I'll show it out there to the guys and get their opinions this evening. So over to you, Colin, on this one.
They're in a strange spot, right? Because ultimately, this identity of the team is sort of built around Tannehill and Derrick Henry, and you wonder how much the team believe in Ryan Tannehill. And so they obviously went on the amazing run, but it has felt that kind of once they lost that game to as the number 1 seed, and despite all the sacks, Tannehill obviously had a nightmare game, right? And he came out afterwards and he talked about it, but it seems like that has kind of followed him around in the same way that kind of, remember Sam Darnold and seeing ghosts. Now, not to that level, but it's like there isn't the full belief that maybe existed before. The league is also going in an interesting direction, because we saw teams try and run the ball more last year, but as I mentioned before, 3 teams had rushers who went over 1,500 yards on the ground. None of those teams made the playoffs. So the Titans' identity is obviously around Derrick Henry. But like, how much longer can he continue? We know the fact that, running backs have a shorter shelf life than many other positions. So where exactly are they going on offense? Malik Willis came in, but like, they seem to have doubts around Malik Willis. So and you're going to have ups and downs with young QBs. And it seems like, because there's an awful lot thrown on fans, right? And fans turn on young QBs, but coaching staffs do it as well. Like, go back to Bill Belichick pulling Mac Jones at one point last year and putting Bailey Zappi in, and then like people being in the crowd being absolutely delighted, only for Bailey Zappi to basically have his pants pulled down in the second half and do absolutely nothing. And it felt a little bit like, maybe as a Belichick disciple, we saw a little bit of that with Vrabel, who has been so impressive as a head coach, but I just felt they didn't really, there was all this sort of, is Malik Willis going to play and is he not? And it just felt like, what exactly is their identity? And maybe they need to kind of get back to what the Titans were really good in the trenches. And essentially, you were going to have to go out there and win every single battle against them if you were going to beat this team. And they lost their way on that a little bit. I think in terms of the guys that they have brought in, they all probably have a point to prove. Murphy Bunting, Key, and Andre Dillard. Now, you sign those guys in free agency, they all come maybe with a little bit of an asterisk around injuries or other questions, but sometimes it clicks. And I think Vrabel, I do think he's a very good head coach. I really do. And he can certainly, as a man motivator. So it's possible that these guys come in with a point to prove. But you do worry about, like, the team is built on the QB and the running back, and how much do they have left in the tank. And we talked on the show, Brian, before my final point, you build around a QB that you believe can win you a Super Bowl, all right? Do you really believe Ryan Tannehill can do that?
I think my thoughts on that one. I think I know by Frankie's thoughts. Frankie, John Robinson was fired during the season. You could see disharmony was there even on draft night last year, where the video coverage came out thereafter around the time of the firing, where you saw Vrabel's reaction to the AJ Brown trade. Ron Carton has come in GM from the 49ers, and I thought we might have seen some of these guys that are available off the 49ers this year that, that haven't been re-signed going there, but that hasn't been the case either. like the division, like the Jacksonville haven't done much. Okay, we're discussing tonight around the fact that the Texans have made some smart moves. The Colts are the Colts right now. We don't know what's going to come in. And like they are kind of fortunate that the division is in a bit of a quandary as well. That they may quickly get the show back on the road if things can work out with the draft and stuff.
Yeah. No, when I look at the moves the Titans have made, this feels like a team that almost like recognizes that its window has kind of closed. Like you heard rumors starting to swirl about them possibly trying to look for trades for Derrick Henry, even though those kind of seem to get snuffed out fairly quickly. But like, this is not a young roster. This is a team that just had like their 9-year left tackle retire. They let Nate Davis go, one of their starting guards. Like this is a team that I think recognizes they probably have some pretty decent self-awareness to say we cannot win with this current roster. Kind of like Colin was saying, like, Ryan Tannehill is not a QB you can win around to go or build around to go win a Super Bowl at this point, I think, in his career. So I think the moves they're making, like I like them each decently individually. I think Bunting is a pretty decent nickel corner. I actually like a decent bit from his tape, but I know he has kind of struggled with the issues, but kind of seems like a decent like boomer bust signing. Arden Key's been slowly getting better and better every single year. Had a pretty decent breakout year a couple of years with the 49ers. Only got better last year for the Jaguars and now kind of cashes in with the Titans. I think that's a decent piece for them to add in. And then Dillard will be able to kind of replace what they lost with Lawan. We'll kind of see how he looks. But these feel like moves of a team that, again, isn't going to go all in to keep trying to pry open this window. I think they're kind of trying to get younger. They're making, I'd say, smart acquisitions that aren't huge risk. They're not handing out big contracts. They're kind of letting it all kind of play out, I'd say. I wouldn't be shocked but again, something that's hard is Mike Vrabel is a hell of a coach. Like Mike Vrabel, it seems like every year can take any roster and they will have like double-digit wins. It's kind of insane. So while this team, I think, is trying to take a step back, it'll be interesting to see kind of the balance act between Mike Vrabel's really good and I think is going to keep this team competitive, especially like you guys are saying in the AFC South, where it seems like you can win just 7 or 8 games every single year and you'll be in the playoff hunt. But like, this is a team I think that wants to kind of be bad a little bit so they can find some answers at quarterback, maybe get a little bit younger with their offensive pieces. But they're kind of stuck in this section where, well, we still have like an okay quarterback. Like he's not one of the worst 16 starting quarterbacks in the league, Ryan Tannehill, when he's healthy. And I'd say that their offense is decent enough that they can win games and they have enough pieces and good enough coaching where it'll be kind of interesting to see how they kind of progress forward through this stage in their rebuild. Literally, I'd say this is kind of their opening stage of a rebuild.
First round pick, third round pick last year, both wide receivers. Interesting to see what comes of them in this season. Steep learning curve last year. I'm going to close out with 2 players, Colin, on the trade block, essentially. 2 different scenarios. One team who are essentially all in right now, and that's the Bengals. And John Williams obviously has reacted to the Orlando Brown trade by looking to move on. And we've seen the various different beat writers come out this week saying, there's a lot of teams in for him. Essentially looks like they're trying to drum up interest. And then DeAndre Hopkins as well, for various reasons. Third pick in the draft. Looks like the Cardinals could even move out of there to allow someone like the Colts or the Raiders potentially to move up in terms of trying to get their quarterback. Like DeAndre Hopkins, I'll start with him. It strikes me as a scenario similar to Jalen Ramsey where someone will take him all right, but not at the contract he's on, and they'll have to renegotiate the contract. Or if you do take the contract, they're only going to give up a 3rd or 4th round pick. And like the Cardinals obviously are looking to try to get a second out of this, and that's not realistic in my opinion. Would you agree with that? Agree on that one?
Yeah, because of the contract, absolutely. It kind of like, as I said, the Ramsey move, the Von Miller move a few years ago, where the Broncos got more out of it because they were willing to pay some of it. I mean, when you're talking about that sort of players, they are the pieces, the final kind of pieces of the puzzle, essentially, is what you're kind of looking to do. So if you're a team, and I'm sure Hopkins, would want that as well. He wants to go to a team that are going to compete, and he is kind of and the final piece at wideout that can offer them something different. Now, we have seen teams over the past couple of years kind of bring guys like that in that you thought were going to make a real difference, but sometimes it hasn't always worked out. I think Hopkins is probably a class above a lot of those guys, so he should still be able to contribute. But, he went from probably being the best, or amongst the best. I think it's very difficult to say the best when you're talking kind of 3 to 5 guys usually, but he was certainly up there, and you could have made a decent argument for him. He's obviously slipped a bit, but he's still a very good piece. So it will be interesting to see. And some of this stuff, because of where, like if it doesn't go in week 1 or week 2, sometimes teams kind of take a couple of weeks, and you might not see movement now on some of these until closer to the draft. Or potentially even on draft night, when you look, say, last year at what happened. So it might take a little bit of time as teams kind of assess. And what Frankie was talking about, like there'll be teams that will look at their rosters. Like the Titans probably know, this is unlikely to be our year. Look, anything can happen. But there'll be teams that will step back and go, right, do we really want to make a push for it this year? Do we think that window is open? What do we need to add to that? And generally, the pieces that you're adding are kind of cornerback, wide receiver, or an edge. And Hopkins is, he can be a difference maker, but for the right team.
Keeps being linked to the Patriots. Be interested to see if his relationship with Bill O'Brien is reconvened now that he's back in New England. I'm going to close out with this one, and it's I touched on it there briefly, Frankie. Jonah Williams asked for a trade from the Bengals last year. They went very aggressive in free agency in terms of trying to shore up that offensive line. Three marquee signings we saw in the playoffs. They missed those players against the Bills, and yet they found a way to win in that snow game. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, it cost them again in the championship game. They couldn't protect Burrow, and then they brought in Orlando Brown, giving him a sizable contract. Williams obviously wants to move on. Whoever picks him up was getting a really strong offensive line guy, I would have thought.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about getting like a guy who I'd say is probably like I don't want to say bang average, but like right along that average line for offensive tackle, that's a really good thing. Like offensive lines, you're not necessarily looking to just have like one superstar and a few below average guys. You really want to have a cohesive unit of 5 players that can play together. If anything, you want to have like 7 or 8 so you can rotate in for when injuries happen. Jonah Williams offers that flexibility. He isn't on too horrible of a contract right now, so I'd imagine that any team that's kind of looking to jostle for playoff position, especially in this AFC where it seems like you literally just need to load up and load up and load up and load up because you're going to be facing these star-studded rosters all the time. I'd imagine he gets moved. It'll be interesting to see, again, the Bengals are one of those teams that is contending. So you'd like to imagine that they're not in a rush to give him to like a team like the Chiefs or something, not that, that really makes sense, but I'd imagine they're not trying to give him to an AFC rival, but they might not really have much choice because I'd imagine the teams that are looking to add a quality starting offensive tackle at his cost before the draft, they're not going to be teams that are really looking to, as I've kind of said, I don't want to say tank, but aren't going to be looking to pry their window open when they don't really have the surrounding goods to do so. So it'll be interesting to see where he ends up. I haven't actually seen too many of the rumored spots he's been rumored to go.
Nothing stands out at the moment, but look, we'll see how it goes. I'd imagine might see some trades leading up to the draft, or maybe it'll be another scenario like last year where there'll be trades on the draft night. We won't know what way we're looking at all. That's it for this week's show. I imagine we'll reconvene next week with a new show and work our way through all the latest news. We didn't even get into Lamar Jackson tonight. Still no movement on that. But I'd like to thank USA Sports for again partnering the Irish NFL show, the prizes in which they've offered up, and obviously the discounts that are now for 25% off online and then 20% within the store in the ILAC Centre in Dublin. But great to have Arif on again on the show, and hopefully we get to talk to him again later on in the off season. And I think that's it for now, Colin, unless you want to close.
Yeah, just to really enjoyed this evening, and just to say, obviously, say with the kind of St. Patrick's Day weekend, people might be still catching up. We've had a host of great podcasts over the past couple of weeks with some wonderful guests. So definitely check those out wherever you get your podcasts.
And a few more to come as the week progresses. I think we've got a good one tomorrow with the NFC South and a number of other ones later in the week as well. So again, thanks for everybody who's taken time out to watch the show this evening, and we'll be back next week. But keep an eye on the podcast as they go out throughout the course of the week and the weekends. Thanks for now.